and welcome to Raw Machines, a journey into some of the world's most remarkable manufacturing processes. Today we explore the traditional bell founding process of the Mabillon family at their foundry in Saarburg, Germany, where centuries-old artisanal methods are still carefully preserved. Here, metallurgical knowledge and craftsmanship are passed down through generations, forged into resonant tones built to endure time itself. Let's begin the journey. The Mabillon family was an old European bell-founding lineage, documented as active from around 1590 and originating in Mouzon. In keeping with the early tradition of itinerant founders, one branch of the family settled in Saarburg in 1770, laying the foundations for the local bell foundry. Although the workshop became permanently established only at that time, the oldest surviving Mabillon bell, dated 1639, demonstrates that the technical tradition had developed much earlier. A key figure was Urbanus Mabillon, a bell founder and cannon founder, who was granted professional privileges by the elector of the electorate of Trier. The bell is cast in a clay mold based on the three-part mold principle, consisting of the core, the false bell, and the outer mold casing. Together, these elements create the precise mold cavity in which the molten metal forms the bell. The bell's shape and acoustic profile are defined using a schablone, a rotating metal profile template that moves around a fixed axis. During the preparation stage, the schablone is mounted on a vertical iron spindle anchored into the ground and stabilized by a supporting frame. The key technical requirement is that both the spindle and the support structure must be perfectly vertical. Even the slightest deviation can deform the mold and directly affect both the bell's geometry and its sound quality. Once the mold spindle and the schablone are precisely aligned, mold maker Wisław Sokolowski begins constructing the bell core using bricks. The bricks are laid in concentric rings around the axis, while the schablone rotates steadily to control the core's profile and roundness. According to technical calculations, selected bricks are deliberately spaced apart at defined intervals to create ventilation channels. These openings allow fire to be lit inside the core during later stages, drying the mold and stabilizing its structure before the molten metal is poured. The mold under construction belongs to a 5-bell peal, commissioned for St. Joseph Parish in Merzig. The core bricks are carefully measured and tapered to maintain an accurate circular profile. Partially fired bricks are preferred because they are easier to shape. Around the exterior of the core, a load-bearing iron ring is firmly installed, enabling the entire mold assembly to be lifted and lowered into the casting pit at a later stage. In traditional bell founding, the schablone is regarded as the master founder's most valuable asset. It embodies the bell profile, the cross-section of the bell wall, which directly determines pitch, timbre, and resonance. The master founder's first and most critical task is the precise calculation of this profile. It is initially drawn with compass and pencil onto a thick wooden board, where geometric coordinate points are laid out according to previously calculated acoustic parameters. Working together with Marian Mabalon, these coordinates are then transferred onto a second board to create the finished schablone. Two curves appear on it, representing the inner and outer surfaces of the bell wall. These lines are inked to ensure accuracy during use. The schablone also records the intended pitch and the name of the commissioning parish. Before being put into service, the board is carefully cut and shaped along the defined profile, making it ready for the subsequent stages of mold construction. Based on the completed schablone, and once the brick core has been fully constructed, the mold makers begin applying and shaping successive layers of clay onto the core surface in strict accordance with the defined profile. In traditional bell founding, clay serves not merely as a covering material, but as the primary shaping medium, determining both the precision and durability of the mold. The molding compound consists of clay mixed with horse manure, prepared in varying consistencies to suit each stage of the process. The clay is crushed and thoroughly blended in the foundry's clay room to ensure fineness, plasticity, and adhesion, while minimizing cracking during drying and withstanding the high temperatures of casting. To guarantee consistent material quality, the workshop still employs specialized clay mixing and crushing machines dating from the early 20th century. By combining the rich local clay deposits of Saarburg with time-honored mixing techniques, the Mabalon family has preserved the reliability of its bell molds across generations. After the clay layers have been applied and shaped, the mold makers carry out a final inspection of the core surface, ensuring that no bricks protrude. This requirement is critical, as even the smallest irregularity can distort the profile of the subsequent clay layers. For the 5-bell peel commissioned for Merzig, 3 of the smaller bell cores have been completed and moved to the internal drying stage. Each core is initially fired with charcoal briquettes to establish a base temperature, then kept alight with coke to maintain stable heat throughout the drying process. At this stage, mold maker Hans Hein shapes the bell neck using stiff clay, followed by finer clay layers reinforced with jute fibers to increase cohesion and reduce cracking during drying. The entire core is fired overnight. Bell founders often liken the core to a tall brick kiln. Ventilation openings at the base draw in air, while the bell neck functions as a chimney. The following morning, the core surface is moistened with water to wash away brick dust and to improve adhesion for the next layers of clay, preparing the mold for the subsequent stages of bell shaping. Once the bell core has been dried, stabilized, and its surface properly prepared, the mold makers move into the stage of precision, shaping using the profile template. At this point, mold makers Hans Hein, Wisław Sokolowski, and Josef Ulrich carry out the fine shaping of the bell core. The first clay layer applied at the base of the core consists of stiff clay reinforced with jute fibers. This layer increases structural strength, reduces the risk of cracking during drying, and provides a solid bond for the layers that follow. The central body and the bell neck are then coated with a more fluid clay, allowing the schablone to scrape and shape the surface accurately according to the designed profile. During the initial pass, the edge of the schablone retains its full thickness. In subsequent passes, the edge is gradually chamfered inward, leaving only a very narrow contact edge to ensure geometric precision of the mold surface. This stage demands a high level of concentration and experience. Each clay layer must be completely dry before the next is applied. To accelerate the process, high temperatures are continuously maintained inside the core, ensuring that the clay layers bond securely and with precise accuracy. Bells predate Christianity and were originally used in ritual practices, music, and signaling. The art of bell founding developed early in China during the 2nd millennium BCE, later spreading to Western Asia, Egypt, and the Mediterranean world. In Christian Europe, bells only became widespread from the 6th century CE onward. Returning to the technical process, completion of the core proceeds in slow, carefully controlled stages. Depending on size, only 1 to 2 clay layers are applied per day. Before completion, Hans Hein makes a final adjustment of the schablone to ensure that the core precisely matches the bell's external profile. The final fine layers are applied when the internal temperature of the core exceeds 100 degrees Celsius. At the top of the core, a technical groove is formed to accommodate the suspension loop of the bell clapper. The total time required to produce the cores for the 3 smaller Merzig bells is 11 days. Once fully dried, the core surface is coated with graphite, serving as a release agent.
Die falsche Glocke.
The false bell, falsche Glocke, is the second component of the bell mold. It has the exact shape and dimensions of the finished bell, but serves only as a forming model. Before casting, the false bell is broken away to create the hollow cavity for the molten metal. The mold base on which the false bell is built is not coated with graphite. In order to ensure proper adhesion, graphite is used only in later finishing stages of the mold as a release agent against molten metal. To produce the false bell, the schablone is initially rough cut. After the first clay layers are applied, the schablone must be reworked repeatedly, shaved down to millimeter accuracy, and realigned on the axis before each scraping pass. Mold maker Wisław Sokolowski begins applying the first clay layer from the bottom, forming a continuous ring around the core, much like a ribbon. Unlike industrial metal casting, where molds can be reused, traditional bell founding requires a new false bell for each casting, as it is destroyed before the metal is poured. The clay mixture used for the false bell is blended with fermented horse manure, which acts as a plasticizer and improves fineness. The manure comes from draft horses, fed exclusively on hay and oats, and is aged together with the clay for several months to achieve the required plasticity. As suitable manure sources have become increasingly scarce, the foundry maintains its own horses to ensure a consistent supply of this material. Over a period of 4 weeks, the mold makers apply successive thin clay layers reinforced with jute fibers until the false bell reaches the exact wall thickness of the final bell. At this point, the second component of the casting mold is complete, ready for the subsequent stages of the process. Once the false bell has been fully shaped and reaches its exact technical wall thickness, the founders move on to the stage of wax ornamentation and inscription, an operation that is both technically demanding and artistically significant. Marion Mabillon determines the reference lines and the placement of inscriptions, with spacing calculated in proportion to the bell's size. Measurements are taken from the crown of the bell at the top and from the sound bow, the impact zone of the clapper at the bottom, to ensure a balanced and precise layout. The texts and decorative motifs are supplied by the commissioning parish, with each bell bearing its own inscription. The reference lines are transferred onto the schablone and notched into the wooden template to serve as positioning guides. The surface of the false bell is then coated with a very thin separating layer made from a mixture of beef tallow and lard, applied entirely by hand. The mixing ratio is adjusted according to workshop temperature to maintain a consistent viscosity. Letters and ornaments are cast in beeswax using wooden negative molds, typically carved from cherry wood or boxwood. The Mabillon Foundry preserves hundreds of historic letter and ornament molds, some more than 300 years old. After an additional light coating of grease to improve adhesion, Marion Mabillon carries out the process known as einzieren, attaching the wax letters and decorative elements to the surface of the false bell in their precisely defined positions. When the outer mold is later built and the entire assembly is heated, the wax melts away, leaving negative impressions on the inner surface of the outer mold. During casting, the molten bronze fills these cavities, forming raised inscriptions and ornaments on the finished bell. In addition to the main inscription, each bell also bears a dedication line, the Foundry mark, and its production number. Once the wax inscriptions and decorations are complete, the mold makers proceed with building the outer mold, the third component of the bell mold. The first layers are made from extremely fine clay that has been fermented for a long period and carefully sieved, allowing every letter and ornamental detail to be reproduced with precision. These fine layers are dried entirely by air. During this phase, no fire is lit inside the core, as heat would immediately melt the wax elements. Each layer is applied only after the previous one has fully dried. Up to 12 fine layers may be required to achieve a clean and sharply defined negative surface. After approximately 25 days, once the fine layers have stabilized, the outer mold is reinforced with stronger clay mixed with calf hair to increase mechanical strength. From this point onward, heat drying begins. The core is fired with charcoal briquettes and coke, causing the wax to melt away and leave negative impressions on the inner surface of the mold. The outermost layers are then built up with stiff clay reinforced with jute fibers, ensuring the mold shell is strong enough for transport and for pouring molten metal. Although these layers no longer influence the bell's acoustics, the schablone is still used to finish the surface, in accordance with traditional practice at the Mabillon Foundry. Today, the Mabillon Bell Foundry is one of only 7 traditional handbell foundries still operating in Germany. The closure of the renowned foundry in Apolda underscores how traditional bell founding is steadily declining and becoming increasingly rare. In parallel with the completion of the outer mold, the mold for the bell crown, or krone, is produced in a separate room. Arranged on racks are plaster models made in-house at the Mabillon Foundry, which serve as negative molds for the crown. The plaster models are submerged in water overnight to cool them thoroughly. Mold maker Wisław Sokolowski then heats specialized casting wax and pours it into the molds. Upon contact with the cold plaster surface, the wax solidifies into a shell, while the remaining liquid wax is poured out, forming a hollow wax model of the crown. The bell crown consists of a central hub and 6 cannons. After the plaster molds are removed, the wax components are precisely assembled on a turntable and subsequently coated with successive layers of fine clay. The number of layers is recorded using reference marks to control the mold thickness. Next, 3 technical openings are formed in the crown mold, 1 pouring channel and 2 vent holes to allow gases to escape during casting. Finally, the mold is reinforced with layers of stiff clay, jute fibers, and fine clay until it reaches the required strength, ready to be joined with the bell body mold in the subsequent stages of the process. After the crown mold has been fully reinforced, the wax inside is melted out, creating a hollow cavity for the molten metal. Mold maker Josef Merz then prepares the crown for joining with the bell body mold. The vent pipes are securely fixed to the crown. This step is crucial, as gases escape under high pressure during casting. If the venting system is not firmly anchored, the pipes can be forced out and the mold may fail. Next, the crown is positioned onto the bell mold using pre-marked chalk alignment lines to ensure precise concentric alignment between the crown and the bell body. The joint between the crown and the outer mold is then sealed with clay, forming a single unified mold, preventing metal leakage during casting and preparing the assembly for the bell pouring stage. Bell founding is a traditional craft with a history spanning many centuries, requiring deep knowledge of materials and experience accumulated and passed down through generations. In Christian Europe, the craft was initially maintained by monasteries and, from around the 12th century onward, gradually passed into the hands of artisan families, among them the Mabillon family. From a technical standpoint, the production of a bell mold, from constructing the core to assembling the crown, typically takes between 2 and 4 months, depending on the number and size of the bells. The mold set documented in this film was completed in 9 weeks. After mold assembly is finished, fire is kept burning inside the core so that the mold continues to dry over the following days. Once the crown has dried, it is removed to repair cracks, trim excess jute fibers, and apply graphite to reduce metal adhesion. The upper section of the mold is coated with grease as a release agent. Over the next 2 weeks, the mold is fully dried and allowed to cool. Once the mold has stabilized, the founders proceed to the final preparations for the actual bell casting. bell founding process of the Mabillon family embodies a traditional craft of great historical depth and high technical mastery, shaped and sustained over centuries. Every stage, from profile design and mold construction to the creation of the false bell and the completion of the full mold, demands absolute precision, experience, and patience, as even the smallest deviation directly affects the bell's sound and quality. At a time when traditional handbell foundries are steadily disappearing, the Mabillon Foundry not only produces bells, but also preserves and transmits a valuable legacy of European technical knowledge, culture, and craftsmanship. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this story. If you enjoy videos like this, please like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss our next journeys into remarkable crafts and processes. This is Raw Machines. Thank you, and see you next time.